Sergei Karaganov, thank you. You're a political analyst. You're head of the Moscow-based think tank Council for Foreign and Defence Policy, and crucially in this, you're a former advisor to Vladimir Putin. Peter in Birmingham, you've got about 30 seconds. You've been hanging on to talk about speed cameras. Your views, quickly, if you would, sir. Good morning.
Worth it just to speak with you for the first time, Nick. Good morning.
Very kind of you. How kind. Very sweet.
Painting speed cameras yellow so that people can see them, and therefore they'll slow down and they don't need to become money makers.
Right.
Surely that says, have a good look around. If you can't see a yellow speed camera, it's okay to speed.
So what's the answer here, Peter? You sound a wise soul.
Well, you can just extend the argument and say, right, as from such and such a date, the M25, say, will have speed cameras on them somewhere or all round. Therefore, if you speed at any point, you'll get a fine. Don't speed.
Those are the words on which to end. Thanks for your kind words about the show, Peter. We'll talk soon. Coming up here, it's Call Clegg with Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg exclusively after the news on LBC.
On FM, online, on your mobile and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the Defence Secretary is warning of a real and present danger that Russia will attempt to destabilise the Baltic states. Michael Fallon's concerned Moscow could use similar tactics as it has in Ukraine to put pressure on NATO members Latvia, Lithuania or Estonia. Colonel Bob Stewart is on the Defence Select Committee and has told LBC he's right to be concerned.
There's a substantial Russian population in the Baltic states. And remember this, that one central plank of Russian foreign policy is to say that where there are Russians living abroad, it is the Russian state's duty to go to their assistance if they require it.
The Liberal Democrats are promising to increase the amount of free childcare offered to working parents if they're in power after the election. It's as a report claims the cost of childcare for under-twos has gone up by a third in 5 years. Nick's been speaking to Lib Dem Women and Equalities Minister Jo Swinson.
The first priority that we have set out is to extend the current entitlement of 15 hours a week of free childcare to all 2-year-olds.
And Nick Clegg will be taking your calls here on LBC next. The black man pushed off a train in Paris by Chelsea fans says those responsible must be punished. The 33-year-old told a French newspaper he thought they attacked him because of the colour of his skin. Annual profits at British gas owner Centrica have fallen 35% to £1.75 billion. The company's cutting investment and costs and says falling oil and gas prices have made it a very difficult year. At 8:45, the FTSE was down 32 at 68.65, and LBC weather. Chilly and bright to start off for London and the southeast, turning cloudy and wet. Highs today of 9 degrees, mostly cloudy, wet and windy for England and Wales. Showers in the northwest will move into Scotland, Northern Ireland, some rain with sunny spells expected. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Lisa Aziz.
At Volkswagen Commercial Vehicles, we know that whether you're running or buying a fleet, timing is everything. So act now and get a Volkswagen Caddy from only £189 a month with no upfront costs. This new offer runs till 31st of March 2015. And that's what I call perfect timing. Ooh, we're good. Volkswagen Commercial Vehicles, working with you. Search Caddy offers to find out more.
Available with contract hire. Business users only. Excludes 20% VAT. Exclusions apply. T's and C's apply. Finance subject to status. Available to 18s and over. Volkswagen Commercial Vehicle Finance.
It's 9 o'clock across the UK.
Are you leaning towards any political party at this time?
Mr. Clegg's party.
Okay, in a word, opportunity, Freddie.
We found him. We found the voter.
What, just as much as you'll find LBC listeners in the Big Apple?
Well done. Touché, sir.
Well, you know, if you ask for it.
The most talked about radio show is here. Call Clegg. 0345 6060 973. Get straight through now. Leading Britain's conversation. This is Call Clegg with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Only on LBC.
It's 9 o'clock on Thursday the 19th of February, and that means it's time for Call Clegg with me, Nick Clegg, here on LBC. So I'll be taking your questions for the next half an hour. Do get in touch on 0345 6060 973 or email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk, and of course you can watch on the website lbc.co.uk. So let's go straight to the first caller. Paul in Islington. Hello, Paul.
Hello there, sir.
Hi.
I'd just like to ask you where on God's
earth you get this sum of money for people going on sick notes? Most of us don't even get sick pay. I'm a paramedic. I don't even get sick pay if I get a disease from the hospital.
And just to remind my listeners, because many people tune in at this hour, Paul, don't go, just to give them background, this is a blitz by the government to crack down on what is believed to be more than 1 million taking sick leave for over a month each year, which, they say, costs the economy north of £9 billion. That's to give the listeners a recap. On you go, Paul, for your question.
Yes, like I say, I'm a paramedic. I don't even get sick pay at all.
Right.
So when I go and get a sick note, I have to pay for it. So where, in God's name?
Yeah.
Well, I'm reporting it to the police to move you.
I think something's going on. You're a paramedic. Stay on the line. I sense you need something to deal with. Let's certainly hear. This is the front page of one of the newspapers today, Deputy Prime Minister of the Times.
So this is about, Paul. I don't know whether he can listen or he sounds...
Paul, will you come back to us or are you working?
Sorry.
That's all right, mate. No, you've got a job to... Right, the Deputy Prime Minister's talking to you now. Go ahead, sir.
So, Paul, what this is about is basically... asking GPs, and it's very much in their hands to decide this, that where they feel they have someone who has been off sick, off work for a month, but the GP thinks that they could still work, that they're giving the GPs the option, encouraging them to refer those individuals. So clearly not someone who's undergoing treatment is very sick, but encouraging that person into a process where they're helped back into work. And I think that is a sensible way of doing this. This is not. Firstly, this is not for frog marching people into the job centre where they, where they're simply not in a position to do that. It's people who've taken time off work because they've been calling off sick, but where the GP thinks that they could nonetheless work. And I think that is a sensible thing to do, because you don't want people off work for much longer than is really, necessary or frankly good for them. So that's what this is about. And I think, I think most people would kind of think that's kind of common sense. If the GP thinks that they could get back to work, you should be encouraging them to do so.
Response from you, Paul?
Well, I'd like to, I don't really understand the sum of money. That's the thing. I mean, if no one's getting sick pay and you have to pay for the certificate yourself, where is the loss there apart from to the person that's sick?
I think that's what's really excellent. And it may be a little unfair, because I think, although he's responsible for many things, I don't think he actually comes up with these equations. But it is interesting how they reach this sum, Deputy Prime Minister, £9 billion. I think that's what's causing consternation here.
Well, of course it costs the economy and employers a lot of money if people are just off sick and you can't replace that person and they're off sick for a long period of time, longer than they need to be. I mean, I think, Paul, we might be slightly talking slight cross purposes about how much sick pay do you get, and that frankly depends on where you're working, of course. And but I think the figure that you might be referring to, Paul, is the fact that clearly having a lot of people not at their desk, not at work when they could be. I happen to have a sort of old-fashioned view that on the whole work is kind of good for people,
yep.
And if you can be nudged back into work, then that is a good thing. But it's also good for the economy, because if people are off sick instead, of course that costs the economy money.
Paul, good luck with what you're doing. It's a crucial job out there on the front line. Thanks
Indeed
for all your
is.
activities. Mr. Clegg, where do we go next?
Abdul in Hammersmith. Hello, Abdul.
Hello, good morning. I've got a question regarding the rise of Islamophobia, and I don't hear many politicians talking about this, that the Muslim community in the UK feel vulnerable. We feel targeted because of what's going on overseas, and we feel that we're living under scrutiny 24/7. I mean, I have my wife that can't even go down to the shops without people saying things at her, swearing at her. And what are you going to do regarding keeping the Muslim community safe in the UK?
So what was the last bit, Abdul?
What are you going to do about keeping Muslim community safe in the UK?
So Abdul, I think the great tragedy is you are quite rightly saying that many law-abiding Muslim Britons are feeling that they are somehow being regarded with suspicion because of the horrific violence committed in the name of Islam, completely sort of by this perverted ideology, which is actually appropriating and misappropriating Islam elsewhere in the world. And at the same time, as we also know, you have parents in our Jewish communities who are feeling quite unsure about what's going to happen to their kids when they drop them off at school. Are they being properly protected? This is the great tragedy, is that all different communities are feeling increasingly insecure. And the role of the government, of course, is to make sure that all communities are as properly protected as possible. So, for instance, I said this week that I thought certainly any government of which the Liberal Democrats are part in the future, and I very much hope, frankly, any government of any political persuasion will continue the funding that is provided via something called the Community Security Trust to Jewish faith schools to make sure they're properly protected. But I said at the same time, and of course we should look at extending the same kind of protection to Muslim faith schools where there are security issues around that as well. So of course we have a duty, Abdul, as you said, as a government, to make sure that all communities, regardless of their background, their ethnicity, their religion, feel safe in modern Britain. At the same time, though, of course, we all need to unite together, don't we, Abdul? I'm sure you agree on this. And this was the subject of this conference where President Obama spoke overnight in Washington, and say unambiguously that there is nothing Islamic about so-called Islamic State. It is, in fact, it is a medieval perversion of a faith which is held dear by many, many millions of law-abiding Muslims around the country, around the world.
Abdul?
Which is true, but do you not think the right-wing media is making it worse in trying to fight this ideology that this is not what Islam is about, and they're portraying Islam in such a negative light? And then what can be done regarding the media's stance on Islamophobia? Because we do feel the media is very Islamophobic.
Well, look, I mean, of course you need to keep the perverted terrorist medieval ideology of ISIL completely separate from Islam. It has nothing to do with...
I think Abdul's worried about the media, media portrayal.
Look,
you wouldn't want the government necessarily controlling
I'm not going to start telling the media what to write. Of course not. That's not what you want in a free society, Abdul. But I tell you what I do strongly feel, and I suspect you will believe this as well, is that actually one of the people who speak most powerfully about what Islam really is, rather than the way it's been perverted and misappropriated by terrorists, are moderate, law-abiding Muslim Britons, and the more that you and others, Abdul, can say, this is nothing to do with my faith. It's in fact an outrage to Muslim Britons that Islam is being invoked in that way by ISIL and others. I think that has a very powerful effect as well.
All right, Abdul, thank you. We started the show this morning, Deputy Prime Minister, looking at your manifesto idea regarding childcare and the provision of free childcare for all children of working parents aged between 9 months and 2 years, which would be savings of around £2,670, plus free childcare for all 2-year-olds, saving the family £2,540. Your Lib Dem colleague Jo Swinson was on the line. She's just to remind everybody, Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Women and Equalities, and I pushed on how this would be paid, which we're going to try and bring to you now. Yes, here we are. This is Jo Swinson.
Yeah.
The reality is you're taking away from, say, a married couple with one hand and giving it back with the other.
But we also might be giving it to
Unless
help
they don't have
couples
children
who don't happen to be married, but also are facing real significant
but
challenges.
Then if I'm married without children, all I'm doing is giving.
If you're right, so I mean, at the moment you have a situation where if you're married and you have this tax break, and then you end up your partner dies, then you suddenly don't have that tax break anymore.
But isn't the reality of what Mr. Clegg...
policy, and the money would be much better spent supporting the next generation and helping parents with childcare costs.
Sure. Yeah, I still don't know why she was laughing. So I'm married and I don't have children, and then I get my tax break taken away.
So let's dwell a little bit on this great tax break. Of course, it is not actually given to all married couples at all under the Conservative scheme. So if you're two teachers, you don't get it. If you're someone who believes passionately in marriage...
This is because of financial reasons.
But it's true. Actually, so lots and lots of married people who think they're going to get this great tax break aren't going to get it. That's the first point.
Right.
Second point...
When does it kick in? How much salary?
I think it's April of this year.
No, how much? How much is it that comes in? How much do you have to earn that you actually get it?
I think it's 10. I think one of the married couple, one of the partners needs to earn 10,000 or less. I think I need to check. So lots and lots of married couples listening to this who think they're going to be suddenly, in financial, financial benefit, and not even get this great, much touted Conservative, what I call unmarried tax penalty. Secondly, let's say if you passionately believe in marriage, But you're a woman.
As you do.
Well, as I do. But I don't know, your husband's run off with his secretary in a sort of fit of midlife crisis or whatever. You get what? You suddenly get the tax break. If you did receive it, you're going to get it taken away from you. If you're a widow, your husband's died, you don't get it. It's an extremely... it's £800 million of taxpayers' money being spent on a small number of people who jump through particular hoops set by the Conservative Party. We think it's better to scrap that, use it obviously to balance the books, which we've got to do over the next couple of years, and then once we balance the books in 2017-18, spend... in fact, almost exactly the equivalent sum of money, about £800 million, to make sure that all two-year-old toddlers from whatever family, whatever we know whether they are unmarried.
Wayne Rooney's children again.
Well, let's come back to Wayne Rooney. But
why is it? I'm paying for his children's school meals, and now I'm paying for his next children's nursery.
Yes, but you're also paying
the
to
man's richer than Croesus.
Poor Wayne Rooney. That's all I say. Poor Wayne Rooney, lambasted by you every
good
time.
Luck to the man.
Listen, you've been paying for Wayne Rooney to have the right to go to his local NHS. And get treated on the NHS, as you have every single person who's extremely wealthy in this country. There are certain things that we believe as a country should be universally provided for. And I think the evidence is overwhelming that giving all families with 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds the ability to have free from the state 15 hours preschool support, it has a fantastic impact. Not only on their household finances for those who are on lower incomes, not the Wayne Rooneys. It also has a dramatic effect on the ability of children subsequently to do well in school. So I think it is money well spent, and certainly better spent than this higgledy-piggledy, partial sort of jump through lots of hoops tax break for some married couples, but not for others.
It's highly unlikely, isn't it? If I suddenly decide to have children now...
Indeed.
The
drum roll. Let LBC listeners... The nation is pausing with bated breath. What?
Why should the taxpayer have to pick up... Why isn't it my responsibility to pay for my childcare? I've brought the children into this world. It should be my responsibility to fund
You can make exactly the same argument about education. So why should... So you think everybody should pay for private education?
No,
some people
once
can't.
you get to 4 or 5... But why should suddenly get £2,500?
Here we have once again an illuminating disagreement between us, which is that I think one of the things we've discovered over time is that actually how the kind of help you give as a society to little children before they've even hung up their coat in their first day of primary school has as dramatic, if not more dramatic, an effect on their subsequent ability to do well in life than actually what happens when they are sort of teenagers in the classroom. So investing in early years pays off massively. It means that children, they are more obedient towards their teachers. They mix better with their school. You see?
That's sort of
old-fashioned liberalism creeping in.
Children. Is it not true, Mr. Clegg, that this was implemented in Australia, a similar policy, and they've had to do a U-turn, the idea of free childcare, provision of childcare, and it's so expensive they had to do a U-turn?
It depends how you do it. So what we have done, very much under sort of my impetus under this government, we have given for the first time all 3 and 4-year-olds across the country 15 hours of free preschool support. We're again, because of the impetus from the Liberal Democrats, we're giving 2-year-olds from the lowest income families the 40%.
Which they did in Oz, and it was so expensive they had to reverse it.
Well, to actually give it to all 2-year-olds would cost another £800 million. We spend already as a society £6 billion on early years support. Now, I think, and this is the point that Joe was making, even though actually, if you really must know, scrapping the unmarried tax penalty is something we would put towards dealing with the deficit. What we would then do is, once the deficit's dealt with in 2017-18, unlike the Conservatives, who, let's remember, want to then indulge in a further £38 billion worth of unnecessary cuts to public services because they want to see the amount of money in public services remorselessly go down, we would relink the amount of money going to public services, including childcare and preschool support, to the growth of the economy. And it would save families up and down the country thousands of pounds. Right. Can I just contrast this? Because since you contrasted it with the Conservative tax break, their plan of taking 12 billion quid out of welfare alone would cost about 8 million people on modest incomes about £1,500. Now, what is remotely fair about allowing tax dodgers to not pay a single extra penny towards balancing the books and instead penalising the working age poor?
Did your mum stay at home with you?
Yes.
We didn't do you any harm. You seem to do all right.
No,
when you
this is
got to
not.
school.
Everybody's free to take their own choices.
Yeah, but you were able to hang your coat up on the peg when you first walked into primary school, I imagine.
Indeed, and they'll be locked in. No, oh, the misunderstanding! You are firmly grabbing the wrong end of the stick on this issue. Look, it is entirely, of course, free for mums and indeed dads to stay. It's not for me to say, as a politician, what people should do with their own families. It is, however, for me as a politician to try and make those choices easier and to make sure that we do our bit to make sure that when kids start at school, they start well.
I think we have a related question, Deputy
Jennifer in Stratford.
Hi, yes.
Hello, Jennifer.
I actually have two questions that I really wanted to talk about. The first one being, for childcare providers, we pay full business rates, yet we are providing care for 3 and 4-year-olds and also 2-year-olds in the same way as schools. So why is there never any talk about actually making it more affordable for childcare providers by actually reducing our business rates to make us more in line with the schools? I mean, that's my first question. The second question is, with the funding for 2, 3 and 4-year-olds, that is paid directly to providers. So why do you not pay tax credits for the element that parents get directly to providers? For two main reasons. The first one being that you would cut out a lot of the fraud that still goes on, and the second reason being that, of course, you would actually reduce the cost of administering the scheme because you would have one payment going to a provider, and you could do some sort of return that providers actually complete, more than having thousands of funds going out to parents individually.
So, Jennifer, very quickly, I mean, look, I would dearly like to see the business rate burdens and indeed other burdens on childcare providers freed up. In fact, we have, as you probably know, we've tried to free up some of the red tape, for instance, about registering, about how you register as a childminder, for instance. We're allowing schools to cater for 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds in a way, in a sort of lighter touch way than has previously. That's been controversial, as you know, in your sector, but I think it's sensible. And look, business rates generally need to be looked at from top to toe. Business rates are penal for many, many small businesses up and down the country, not just in your line of work. And we're now conducting, we announced this last December, the Treasury is conducting a sort of top-to-toe review of business rates because in many ways they are anachronistic, out of step with the kind of costs of doing business. And let's see what that review yields. On the funding, as you know, the funding goes from central government to local authorities. So, and then local authorities, in a sense, pass it on to you, and they're to be candid, there is sometimes a bit of a problem because we actually, as a central government, give to the local authorities a per pupil rate, which is actually much higher than the average rate charged to parents, and that's why I'm very keen to say to local authorities, look, you've got this money, we're not ring fencing it, but you really should pass it on pretty well in full. So that you're not left short when you're providing that those free hours to parents. But I think it's right as a matter of principle that, for instance, the new universal credit, which will come into effect, it is actually money which goes into people's bank accounts. That's the whole point of it, that people use it responsibly, and that it's not like the old benefit system with lots and lots of different benefits with lots of different strings attached. It is a sort of lump of money that people then have to manage responsibly, and it will include, by the way, for those on low incomes through the universal credit, 85% coverage of their childcare costs, up from the 70% of the costs that are covered at the moment. I think that's the right way round. But I hear what you say, Jennifer.
Jennifer, quick response from you, if you would.
Well, a couple of things, because before it was 85% and then it went down to 70%.
I think it was 80, but
80.
It was 80, so it's going up to 85 rather. Yes, you're right.
And it was reduced, and now you're increasing it. But the issue often parents have, especially when they're first starting at a childcare provider, is that their tax credits don't come through straight away.
Right.
So therefore it's a catch-22 for parents who want to go back to work, who don't have the financial means to actually pay for their childcare, and it wouldn't be right to expect childcare providers to subsidise that scheme in order for parents to do that. But when you're talking about the rates that providers actually get from the local authority in relation to the grant, there is a lot of issues in relation to that, and a lot of organisations are saying, as well as childcare providers, that you are underfunding the system. And that is one of the major issues. Yeah. And in relation to business rates, I think that's something that you could do in relation to childcare, because a lot of the talk is about affordability of childcare, but very few people talk about the cost of running childcare.
Sure. No, I think you make a fair point about the effective business rates. I don't actually agree with you, Sonny, about the rates. But if you want, I will get your details and send you through the rates that central government uses, which is quite well, in fact, much more generous than the rates that are on average sort of charged across the country. So what I'm sort of rather diplomatically trying to say is I think that sometimes there's a bit of a problem that the money that we actually provide, which according to, I kind of put it like that, the kind of market rates are pretty generous, are not being handed through. What you say about tax credits is very interesting. I'll have a look at that. You're basically saying there's a cash flow issue for someone who's first taking up the childcare entitlement. If they don't have the money in the bank through the tax credit system to do so, who kind of tides them over? And let me, if I may, Jennifer, have a look at that.
OK, thank you for that. Let's do an email. Thanks, Jennifer. Good luck with what you're doing. Let me put an email question to you. This comes from Albert in Leicestershire. Ed Miliband's plans for a mansion tax on homes, Lord Kinnock says, will cost little more than a slap-up meal. Does the Deputy Prime Minister think Lord Kinnock is right?
I think the idea that the Labour Party have, I think they have, of a sort of, a kind of flat fee or levy above a certain amount. That's something we sort of, as a party, advocated in the part. I actually think it doesn't make sense because what most people think is fairer is to have a sort of, you basically extend council tax bands in effect, just up the kind of property scale. That's what we think is a more sensible way of doing it. Everyone, I think, kind of gets that we've got a property tax system. Council tax comes in different bands. Why should those bands stop at a certain amount? And so what we're working on is an approach which basically extends those bands. Technically it might be slightly different to how the council tax system is administered, but the principle is that one. And that, I think, is what most people, I think, accept as a fair way of making sure that very high value properties pay their fair share. Not in a punitive way, but in a way that means that they are basically treated the same as someone who's living in a more modest property.
All right, we move on to other calls.
Sam in Bexley. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Mr. Clegg.
Hello.
Great show.
You what?
Yeah, firstly, it's a privilege and honour for me to speak to you. Thank you for allowing me.
That's all right, Sam.
I've been listening to your show for a while.
Yes.
Good.
I also been a member of the party. I became a member about 3 months ago.
Oh, Sam, let me embrace you over the airwaves.
Yeah, I bet there was a hell of a queue that you had to wait there to get into
Nick
the
Ferrari's
party.
Looking shocked for some reason. It does happen, Mr. Ferrari.
Sam, what is your question of the party leader?
Right. I would like to ask you, if you were to win the next general election...
Ah, yes.
Will you go back to your education policy 5 years ago to grant free tuition fees?
Good question.
Because, you've been blaming the coalition for not sticking to that promise.
Yeah.
I have two students at uni, and the third one on the way. So will you go back to the promise?
So Sam, I think once bitten, twice shy. I'm not going to make commitments in this area. In fact, indeed, any others, which I don't think we can deliver. Look, as you know, the arrangements which are now in place, which your kids are going through, it's, well, in a nutshell, it was the fairest deal I could get. It's quite simply that. It's the fairest deal I could get. And thankfully, as you know, Sam, it's proving to be much fairer than all the people predicted at the time. Partly because, as you know from your own children, in the system that was introduced by Labour, I mean, they airbrushed this out of history now, of course, but Labour introduced fees and then increased them. Thousands of youngsters had to pay up front. As students, they had to pay the thousands of pounds of fees. We've taken that away. You don't need to pay anything up front. And basically what we've introduced, it would have saved me a lot of heartache if only we'd called it this. We've actually introduced, in effect, a very progressive graduate tax. You only pay back... Your kids, Sam, will only pay back many years after they leave university. And in fact, they'll only pay back if they can afford to do so. If they can't, if they're on low incomes or not working, they don't pay back a penny. And if they can't pay it back by the end of their working life, they don't have to. The outstanding amount will be paid for them. So I think it is more sensible, Sam, to have a look at the way the system is working now. And my own personal view, if you really must know, Sam, is that actually and I find this over and over again as I speak to students, is that the biggest preoccupation for students these days is not the repayment system that they have to go through many years after they've left university, because I think many of them have worked out that in many respects it's fairer and more affordable system it's replaced, but is the upfront grants they get to cover their maintenance costs, their living costs at university. And there, we've got a good story to tell, Sam, because actually we've increased, and Vince Cable and David Willits did this, we've increased the amount of grants going to youngsters from the most disadvantaged families. But I personally think that's the area where any future government might want to do more, because it's those day-to-day living costs rather than the repayment of your loan, many, many years after you've left, that is in many ways the most pressing concern for many students today.
Sam, great to take your call. Well done for joining the party. I'm sure Mr. Clegg is delighted.
Hooray!
We go see if you've got another member on the other line.
Hannah in West Wickham. Hello, Hannah.
Hello.
Hello.
Recently in my local area, I saw a poster about racial hate towards Muslims,
right,
saying that all Muslims should be sent back to their countries. And I contacted my local MP about this.
Who is that?
And they didn't. It's just I don't remember their name.
Okay.
It's just like my local MP, and he didn't do much about it. All he did was apologise. But what's your view on how the MPs could be more proactive about these issues?
Well, I think we should be very outspoken and very clear that anyone nationally, or indeed in your local community, Hannah, and I think it's great. I mean, how old are you, Hannah?
I'm 13.
All right. Well, I think it's great that you sort of care about this so much. It's fantastic. And I think you're setting an example, Hannah, because I don't think people want to live in a community where you've got posters telling any other of our fellow citizens, particularly if they are doing nothing wrong, minding their own business, paying their taxes, abiding by the rules, to somehow go home. That's not the kind of language that or sentiment that I think belongs to the kind of modern, tolerant Britain that, by the sounds of it, Hannah, you and I both believe in.
Quick last line from you, Hannah.
I also have one more quick thing to say.
Okay.
Yes.
So, because I'm very into politics, and it's actually my 13th birthday today.
Happy birthday!
Thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to get a tour around the Houses of Parliament with you, although because I wasn't in your constituency, they said no.
Right.
That's
Hannah, well, firstly, happy birthday, yes, Hannah. And I'm sure your MP, if he or she is listening, I don't know, neither of us know who, but I'm sure we can find out. If they were listening, I'm sure they would immediately get in touch with you and your mum and dad to arrange that tour to...
That
there you go.
To me.
Nick Ferrari is Father Christmas for the day.
Directed to you,
Hannah, we'll get it sorted.
Yeah, we shall sort that. We have another call to go to.
Clark in Brighton. Hello, Clark.
Hello. I'll just start with a little context. I was diagnosed with MS in 2010, and to cut a long story short, that cannabis really helped to alleviate my symptoms more than anything else. I've been campaigning with the United Patients Alliance. I want legal access to cannabis. In my time campaigning, I've spoken to literally thousands of people who found that cannabis is a medicine that helps them. Considering this and considering the huge amount of scientific evidence which shows that medical cannabis is effective, why are you not doing more about it? And I'd like to get your word, and I'd like to get an agreement from you live on LBC that you are going to do more to make this a big issue, because this really does affect people's lives. We need access to legal medical cannabis, because then I could have a job and I want to contribute to society. Why is this being denied to people, and what are you going to do about it?
Clark, I mean, I basically agree with you. In fact, I strongly agree with you that where there is a proven medicinal use for cannabis, for instance, we should make that easier for those to have access to it in a sort of straightforward legal way, in order to alleviate the symptoms that you clearly have, that you know as a user are alleviated by the use of cannabis. I think more generally, Clark, I mean, you may have seen the study this week that says that the use of skunk has, in fact, quite the reverse effect. It appears to have a link to a greater incidence of psychosis, and that's why my view is if you're anti-drug, if you're anti the harm that drugs do, then you should be pro-reform, and that's why I've always argued. And you say I haven't been outspoken about this. I'm going to be very outspoken about this. I've said that this slightly boneheaded approach which says you treat all drugs in exactly the same way, you treat everyone who's ever had access to drugs in exactly the same way, you chuck them in... we chuck 500 people, I think, a year for using cannabis for personal use, maybe some of them even for medicinal use, for all I know, into jail. And yet we allow the Mr. Bigs who peddle the really nasty drugs, like skunk and other drugs, we let them walk scot-free. What is the sense in that? And that's why I, basically, with you, Clark, let's take a more intelligent approach. Let's, where there is a clear medicinal use, make sure that you have access to that in a regulated way. Come down much, much more heavily on the people who peddle the really harmful drugs, and bring drugs out from the shadows, so we don't simply just chuck lots of people into jail who simply get hooked on to harder drugs and get on the treadmill of drug addiction. Many drug addicts, as you probably know, Clark, need to be treated as well as punished.
Right. A couple of questions from me before I let you go, because we're virtually out of time. The Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, as you will be aware, says that President Putin poses a real and present danger now to the Baltic states. How accurate is his summation?
Well, I think, of course, Michael Fallon is right to say that the behaviour of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine is seeking to rewrite the fundamental rules by which nation-states in a civilised world and in Europe interact with each other. I mean, for those who think this Minsk deal is a sort of, is asking a great deal of Putin, it's worth looking at the details. You know what it says? The Minsk, this is the deal, the so-called ceasefire, which appears to have been breached already, basically says the Ukrainians will have control over their eastern frontier with Russia in many, many months to come, only after they've devolved a lot of powers to the rebels who are fighting the Ukrainian army, and all along they've got to pay the bills. Putin is behaving, in my view, in a totally unacceptable way in Ukraine, in effect annexing the vast swathes of territory of another neighbouring state. There is no evidence right now that he is doing or seeking to do the same in the Baltic states. There is no evidence of that, let's be clear. But, of course, we should be vigilant, because when a leader of a nation like Russia starts throwing his weight around in the way that he does, in such an arbitrary and unacceptable way, of course we need to be vigilant.
Last time you had your hedge trimmed, did you get a receipt?
I don't really have a hedge to trim. Oh. I was a lady with a nice hedge, actually, in a very nice suburban part of southwest Sheffield, said to me yesterday, do ask Ed Balls where he gets that hedge cutter for £10, because I can't, for love or money, find someone to trim my hedge for 10 quid. If Ed Balls is listening, if he could get in touch, there's a constituent of mine who's very keen to find the affordable hedge cutter that he clearly...
Before he responds to that, was he right to talk about everyone getting written receipts? Even
no, of course he's not. Of course not. Of course people pay, cash in hand, and
you do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course. I think lots of people do. I think it's much more tricky, by the way. It's not for small jobs. It's when you've got a job, a much bigger job, costing thousands and thousands, and then of course you've got the whole VAT registered threshold, and I think that's the grey area. I think basically bearing down on hedge cutters and cleaners and window cleaners is a bit is a bit over the top.
You're a football fan. What does Chelsea need to do in the light of that ghastly racist attack on the Paris?
They need to find those people, and if they're fans or they're ticket holders, they just sling them out. And I don't know what the law is, given that took place somewhere else. But, it was just... you saw the video.
I did.
It was grotesque. It was I was so ashamed to be... these were British fans. These are British fans in Paris. I'm assuming he was a Parisian commuter.
Appear so, yes.
I thought he was quite sort of brave and dignified. He just stepped forward 2 or 3 times.
I wouldn't want to get on that carriage anyway. And yet we take this pious attitude to other countries, Serbia and Ukraine, and yet it would appear we have the same issues here.
It was a real throwback to a kind of chant and sentiment in football. I thought most of us thought had been stamped out a long time ago.
Lastly, have we got these prime ministerial debates? Have we got those nailed yet?
Which ones?
The debates coming up to the general election.
I have no idea. I don't think we are.
You
should ask David Cameron. He's been playing cat and mouse with the broadcasters for so long. I've no idea. I think. It's now descended into something close to farce. Apparently, we're now going to have 7 people. By the time everyone's done their minute or minute and a half's introduction, the nation will have switched over to whatever is on the other side.
Well, come and listen to us on LBC. With you. Thank you very much indeed, courtesy of the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg. It's been Call Clegg on LBC, where news is next.
Nick Clegg told LBC if the Liberal Democrats are in power after the election, he'd extend the amount of free childcare offered to working parents, no matter how much they earn.
The ability to have free from the state, 15 hours preschool support. It has a fantastic effect, not only on their household finances for those who are on lower incomes, not the way in Rooney's. It also has a dramatic effect on the ability of children subsequently to do well in schools.
It's as a report is warning the increasing cost of childcare means it doesn't pay to work for many families. The Defence Secretary says NATO must be prepared for Russia to repeat the tactics used in Ukraine to destabilise Baltic states. Michael Fallon's warning tensions with Moscow are warming up. It's as the Ukrainian military says 90% of troops have been withdrawn from a key town in eastern Ukraine. A cyclist has died after being hit by a tipper truck during rush hour this morning in central London. The woman in her 30s was pronounced dead at the scene. The crash happened around 8 a.m. in Victoria. Shares in the owner of British Gas have dropped 7.5% after announcing a fall in profits. Centrica made £1.75 billion in 2014, down 35% on the previous year. At 9:15, the FTSE was down 32 at 60.